What's up, you guys? Sean Ross Sapp, Fightful.com, here with a name you know. You know him from AEW, you know him from all over the world, but now you know him from the Wrestling Anonymous podcast. One of the godfathers of wrestling podcasting, Colt Cabana. How you doing?
I'm good, Sean. What's going on, man?
I mean, you could argue that if not for you, I might not be here talking to you right now. I mean, you led the charge in this wrestling podcasting thing.
I always knew that the audio medium would be the best. I love the audio medium. I want to say like 2008, 2009, and I'm no, people. There've been people, maybe Wade Keller and Brian Albert. Like those guys were like,
But who'd they ever beat?
but iTunes changed the game. It really did when they started being able to put it on your phone or your MP3 player. So. I was just obsessed with audio, and I understood how it could be translated to wrestling. And so, I helped, I think, bridge a gap between like it being cool to do audio with wrestling. Not that I was the first, and I don't say I was ever the first, but, I think within the wrestling industry, I was the only person really, on a full-time schedule as a pro wrestler, also as a full-time audio content maker. So I think that's kind of where it all helped guide it. And then, Steve Austin and Jim Ross and Chris Jericho, who are much bigger names than me, they also saw it, years later, but they still saw it. And I think that's when it all became a norm and part of the wrestling fabric.
And I mentioned you, like I said, if not for your podcast, who knows if it would have been normalized to the level it is now. You're normalizing viewers, listeners, readers that have maybe never been a part of a podcast to call in and leave their experiences. So now you're opening up the doors for them. And there might be some people that hear themselves back and they go, you know what? I sound pretty damn good. I'm going to give this a shot. And I mean, these are people sharing their stories, their experiences, and sort of you reacting to them on Wrestling Anonymous.
Yeah, that's what the new podcast is. And I always say that when I did the Art of Wrestling, the height of the Art of Wrestling, like, I think everyone just got so wrapped up in these wrestlers telling these stories. And, there was such a buzz about my podcast, which was so awesome. And then fans would be like, I want to talk about my experiences. I want to tell my stories. And I think fans were looking for an outlet somewhere to put their stories. And sadly that, Art of Wrestling, that's not what it was. But, I've always understood that I've always understood that fans do have these like cool, crazy stories, and there might not be a place for them to live. And so I've been inspired by a lot of different things to make this very podcast that I'm making now, Wrestling Anonymous. But that's definitely one of the things that always sat with me was these fans have these fun stories and there's nowhere for them to live. And I love the idea that I get to do that. And I also love that I'm doing it weekly, but I also love that it's an archival thing.
Yes.
And I always think this way, that in 20 years, in 30 years, we can go back and we can still hear these stories. And that's why I want them to live on the internet forever. And that's why also starting July 1st, I'm going to put up my Art of Wrestling. All the past archives are all going to be available just on the Art of Wrestling podcast feed. So keeping my Patreon alive for Wrestling Anonymous stuff and ad-free stuff. But there was something biting at me that I just wanted. I love the idea of archival stuff. And I do love the idea of it just being free for everybody. So, that's why I'm doing that with the Art of Wrestling. And that's why I think it's fun to collect these stories and then have them in the ether forever.
And there is a lot of history with Art of Wrestling. It's led to some great times. It's led to some not so great times for you. I mean, it has been such an integral part of your life and quite frankly, in wrestling history as well. I mean, major things were revealed on that show and came to light and were discussed, and hilarious moments, a lot of things like that. I mean, that ain't it. I mean, you did it with Wrestling Road Diaries. Like a running joke is I would always ask you who could eat more Arby's roast beef sandwiches without the bun, and a lot of those people have went on to do great things. And now with Wrestling Anonymous, these stories, as you mentioned, they'll live on. They're evergreen. I love evergreen content. Like a story about somebody throwing their wedding ring at Jushin Thunder Liger on accident, that's not going to age. It's not going to date. It will always live.
Yeah, and there's a lot of these kinds of fun stories. And that is part of it, is an evergreen podcast. And so I will say to people, like, I hope you subscribe and you listen every week, or if you just need something to go to bed to and you're not sure, that would be a great, you could just always kind of type in Wrestling Anonymous and listen to those stories. But yeah, that was a fun one. Part of the fun is I'm listening to all these calls, and there's not some not so great ones, but you find the gems, and I do a little editing so I can kind of, there's not a lot of ums and uhs, so it's kind of a straight clean story. And yeah, I mean, just those little stories that and I love when I hear them and I'm like, oh, that's fun. The Haku playing with the little baby, and and there's also like some real life moments. On this week's episode, a fan talks about being there for the death of Owen Hart and how it's impacted them and the trauma and stuff you just don't think about. So it doesn't have to be, and it's preferred not to be like your stories from this week, but although that's definitely a possibility. But it's kind of, a lot of it is nostalgic and looking back, and fans looking back at what they are fond of, or stories that were so wild that they just need someone to tell. So I really enjoy the sifting process as much as I do the editing and the creating.
It has a real throwback feel to it, like call-in radio, but with like a modern twist, because again, I hadn't heard anything in that format for wrestling before. Did anything particularly motivate you? Like, when did the light bulb go off and you were like, this is a good one. This is a good idea.
There's a lot of things that have gone into it. I talked about like an archive. So like, I think it's like John Arizio. Is that right?
Yes, John. Yeah.
Yeah. He had that show from like 30 years ago, and now he's just put those out as a podcast. So just like knowing that those were like fans calling in, and I've always loved a call-in show, and I've always kind of wanted a call-in show, like on the air live call-in show, but it's just, I think Twitch has like allowed me to do that a little bit, but it's not necessarily the weekly podcast that I would want. So that was always striking there with me. There was an old podcast that I loved to listen to called Love and Radio. It was kind of a PRX radio show and podcast, and they used to, it wasn't all about call-ins, but every now and then they would have a hotline show where it was just people calling in like these crazy things, and I always loved the hotline show. So that was something that I was stuck in the back of my head. My friend Chris Gethard does a podcast called Beautiful Stories from Anonymous People, and he takes an hour-long call from a person live. So it's not necessarily the same format, but I definitely think listening and hearing Chris kind of do his thing and his success with that. So and then also old timey radio and NPR. And I feel, I feel, and I want wrestling to have kind of like an NPR feel. I've always thought that there's a place for that in wrestling. And so that's, there's a bunch of mishmash all kind of coming together, which, when I train wrestlers, I'm always like, take from everybody, but you don't necessarily want to just steal from Will Ospreay and then just be fake Will Ospreay, or Kenny Omega and be fake Kenny Omega, but if you're Colt Cabana and you're taken from Boogie Woogie Man, and you're taken from Dusty, and you're taken from Junkyard Dog, and you're taken from Johnny Saint, you're taken from Les Kellett, and you kind of bits and pieces and be inspired and not necessarily stealing. Like, I think those are the best creators, is to get a foundation and then develop it on yourself. So, I'm pretty new in this podcast. It's only 5 episodes in 5 weeks, over a month, but this is the start of it. And then, I look forward to a year, 2 years from now to see where and how this grows.
So people can also see you on AEW programming, obviously. I was there. I remember when the debut happened. How did that come about? Who did you speak to about coming into the company? Was it a process? Like, who are you talking with to hammer this deal out?
I've always, see, if you read the Young Bucks book, they talk very kindly about me. And I think back to the situation where I remember like how well I was doing with merchandise and like how much more I would be doing than other people's. And so in this instance, like how much better I'd be doing than the Young Bucks. And they would just be like, that's crazy that you're making $900, or whatever it was at the merch table. And then fast forward 2 years and we're in Australia and they're making like, I don't want to give their numbers away, but more than $900, with a 3-hour line around the whole building, and, running out of t-shirts within an hour is just so mind blowing. So, I think the Young Bucks and I have always kind of been on the same page, and that's kind of where it came from. And it was at the point where I was done in my mind with Ring of Honor. I was starting with New Japan and Yano, and I kind of wanted that to be my main thing. And then I would just do the independence, and I just wasn't ready to be a full-time commentator like Ring of Honor had me, and so I kind of gave my notice. I had never signed a contract with them; it was always a handshake deal. So I kind of gave them a 2-month notice. I said I'm going to be done in November, and at that point, I didn't say anything to WWE, like I had no interest in that, but I did say to the Bucks, like, here's where I'm at. I'm not saying like I'm not begging or asking. I'm not even really asking. I'm kind of like letting you know if it's something you're interested in. Like, my options are now open. My handshake deal is done. And
so you had let Ring of Honor know that before you even had an AEW deal hammered out.
Yeah, my plan was to do New Japan, and my plan was to do New Japan and the independents. That was my plan.
How has that changed for you? Because, I mean, of course, the world was so different last year, but you're working indies here and there. But, I mean, it felt like every weekend, 2 to 4 times a weekend, you were working somewhere. Like, I would just, we would post the indie results, and it feels like Colt Cabana was on every single one of them. And now it's different. Like, occasionally we'll see like Zelo Pro or something like that, or Wrestle Pro, but it's primarily AEW.
Yeah, well, it had to be when the quarantine started.
Yeah.
So, it was a weird decision. But at first, when I decided to sign with AEW, and they were like, you can do your independence that you would like to, in my mind, I was still going to do Wednesday TV taping, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and maybe more. Like, I was going to go heavy. For the past 12 years or whatever it's been, I've been doing 200 days a year. That's a constant in my career. And during the quarantine, I talked to M-Dog about this, and it's just like, both of our heads are kind of like, there's shows out there, we need to do them.
Yeah.
And so during the quarantine, it's like, there are no shows. So we're allowed, no one's going to think less of us because we're not out there being on every single wrestling show. And I think it's allowed me to learn, as I enter my 40s here, that maybe I don't have to be on every single show. I'm learning to monetize from home with Patreon and Twitch and podcasting and YouTube. And, maybe I can just have a better balance. And so coming back now, I've kind of made a decision in my head to take the local things so I could drive home, AAW, Zelo Pro, maybe AIW in Cleveland, stuff I can kind of drive back and forth. But I really do plan on toning my schedule down, and that never would have happened. And obviously there's nothing good that came out of COVID, right?
Yeah.
But it gave me an opportunity to reflect, like it did for a lot of people, I'm sure. And so that's kind of where I stand now. So and what a savior it was that I signed in February with AEW, knowing that I was going to start in April because I had to I was going to honor my New Japan bookings, go over to Japan. And then obviously all the COVID stuff started, and then Tony was like, well, let's just start you now. We might as well. And I was able to keep a paycheck. I was able to still wrestle and travel, which I feel if I wasn't able to, I don't know how well my sanity would have been if I wasn't able, even if it was twice a month, it like allowed me to like be home, but also still have that pirate instinct of traveling as a wrestler. So it's really been good for me.
So I remember late 2019 when a lot of people were like, what's up with Colt Cabana? What's he doing? What's his contract status? And you were working indies. You were like in California, I think Colorado, Minnesota. You were all over the place there. But in addition to that, I remember it felt like it was like within 5 days. In Japan doing New Japan, you did Final Battle, and then you did NWA. Within like a week. Did you have like conversations with NWA or New Japan and let them know like how did they feel about you heading to AEW, or were they pretty well aware that was going to happen?
after WWE, I just never really wanted to sign a contract unless it really like altered my life. That was
Yeah.
kind of my feelings. And so I've always just been a non-contracted person. You know, NWA, I got, you know, because of the popularity of the podcast and all of the stuff and the merchandise and it just all clicking, I got to a point in popularity where a lot of promoters were just like didn't want to pressure me to sign a contract because they wanted to use me and knew I wouldn't really do anything with the contract. So it just kind of all worked out perfectly. So I didn't have to tell Ring of Honor because I'd already given my notice. And it was a hard conversation with New Japan. And that was a very hard conversation. But, you know, Tony assured me, and I don't know whatever their political background was at that time, but he did assure me that, you know, this doesn't mean you can't go and do Japan. You know, if it works out, like we want you to do Japan. And so that crossroads never came because the pandemic happened and just everything shut down. So,
and
but
they barely brought over, I don't think they brought over any new people from America since that happened.
Right. It just wasn't a reality. And even so, I don't even know if I would have wanted to travel like that. So yeah, but that was I did tell New Japan that, you know, I am signing and I wouldn't be able to kind of, and I knew that they had plans for me and Yano to kind of like essentially team up for most of the tours. You know, I think there was so much success coming from the tag league that we did. And I know people have their opinions on wrestling and I do think it is like the microcosm of it, because the people that hated the style of Yano and myself, which is understandable, we're not for everybody. But in those arenas, it was just magic. The smiles and the laughter, and so that's why sometimes it's important not to read necessarily on the internet, because I knew in the moment, and I could see on the faces of the Japanese wrestling fans, I think how much fun they were having, but I think also how important we are to a show where it is that wrestling style of Suzuki and Tanahashi and just the hardest of the hard. And, you know, like the great Dr. Tom says, you know, wrestling shows are like ice cream. It's circus. You need a little bit of everything. And I think our role to the shows were very important. And I do think my role to any show is very important. I don't want to sound egotistical, because I'm not saying I should be the heavyweight champion of every promotion, but I am aware when done right, like I think what I do is important to a wrestling show.
Have you had any talks with New Japan since then, or has it been just like, well, there's no sense right now?
Yeah, I said I was like, the tag league's coming up, and they were like, no one's going anywhere. I don't know what you're talking about. I was like, oh, all right. I tried.
You did try, but I mean, you have done some really fun stuff in AEW. I think when the Dark Order stuff came about, a lot of people were like, how's this going to work? And it worked out fantastically. Can you maybe tell me about being pitched that or pitching that? How did that come about? Because it's been a home run.
Yeah, you know, obviously there's a lot of sad things, and I don't know necessarily how much like I like to talk about that stuff, but
yeah.
But Brody and I went to Brody with a pitch, and it was after he had wrestled Moxley, right, for the championship.
Yeah, that would have been around the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, it was like they built him up, and then there was nothing for him to do, and it's kind of like a cool down period, because you knew Brody would be in the upper echelon, but that's always a hard spot for like King Kong Bundy after WrestleMania 2, right? It's just like we built him up and he's got to go down for a little bit before he goes up. So I wanted to be that in between guy for him, and you know, give him a big win to then reboost him into the picture, because I knew there would be a little bit of a while of a stall. So I came to him and I said, would you mind me pitching this? And he was like, no, I love it. And I wrote up like a big manuscript of each week by week by week. And, you know, slowly but surely it was starting. And then it got, you know, it started moving left and right, because Cody and the TNT title started entering the picture. And so it started changing up a little bit, but the end game always was to get to this big match with me and Brody. And, you know, obviously it never happened. So I do, sometimes I see stuff online being like, why is Colt in the Dark Order? And it's the most real life shit that there is, you know, like I was like stuck in this matrix of like, will I or won't I? And Brody is, you know, left us. And it's like, it couldn't get more real to why I'm in the Dark Order.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what we were doing. I can't speak enough of how sad that we lost Brody. I got his picture over there. I'm waiting on a
Oh,
frame.
amazing.
I'm waiting on a frame to put it on my wall. But and so many great artists have done stuff like that, and you see it all the time. And that's kind of the cool thing about the community of wrestling. And that's it's the coolest thing that Tony Khan is not only the biggest part of wrestling now, but he's in that community, and he's like, of course we're going to put on this amazing show dedicated to Brody.
What a show. Wow.
Yeah. And so I think we'll always have that, it's like, again, it's archival. It's like, we'll always have that. We can always watch that.
And I love how just like with a few tweaks, Dark Order goes from cult to fun social club. it's like it went from cult that might kidnap you to I want to hang out with those people a lot.
And I think being in the Dark Order is like sums up my career as a wrestler. It's just like I can't wait till the crowds come back, because that's how I've been. It's like I might not be the biggest and the strongest, and I might not look like some of the quote unquote top wrestling stars in the world, but I'm able to connect with the fans. It's something I've always been able to do. And when in an arena, I'm able to get a reaction, and, just a little bit of the little crowds in Jacksonville. I think and I'm hoping it'll open a lot of eyes when the Dark Order comes out to these live crowds. And I'm very excited for what happens after that.
So as we film this, we're filming this before the Saturday Night Dynamite. So from now on, all the Dynamites are scheduled to be live, scheduled to have fans, then going on the road. I mean, after this long away from fans, first off, are you excited to never see Austin Gunn in the first row again?
Oh yes, not for Austin Gunn's sake, but the idea that he was great at what he did. He was great.
And it's like looking at three Billy Gunns, like just it's very eerie.
I'll tell you that, like, Austin would do the whole show being that enthusiastic, and then they would film Dark, and like, let's say he was on the Dark, so he couldn't be in the crowd, so he would be just like sitting up in the rafters with everyone, but he still would be in the rafters yelling as loud as he could, making noise. And I was like, he is the GOAT. He is true. Like, he's, that he wasn't putting it on. He knows how to bring it.
He is his father's son. Like, when you see those two, like, there are little body language things, and you're like, that's Billy Gunn's kid. If they had different faces, you would be able to tell that that's Billy Gunn's kid, just based on the way they walk, the way they move in the ring. I think it's very cool that so much of that is like almost genetic.
I mean, did you see Brock Anderson?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Fair point. That is a good one. So we mentioned you not having a contract prior to AEW, how things were a little bit different. I mean, obviously people remember you were in WWE. Things didn't go probably the way that you wanted there. Have you spoken with them over the past however many years? I mean, besides obvious things that we won't get into.
I did that. I did a tryout for commentating.
Okay.
But that was interesting too, because it was like 2013, and Triple H, in my head, I believe, had seen an interview I did and was like, oh my God, this guy can talk. And then Michael Cole got a hold of me, and I'll say this, like, I had such a awful experience, I think, with people in charge when I was there. Just, there was a lot of, like, maybe you would, I wouldn't call it bullying, but just like, they were great at authority intimidation, if you know what I'm saying, right? So when I got the call from Michael Cole, he was so nice and so, like, of course he should be professional, of course he was, but he was just kind and like considerate, and I hadn't seen that from that company from an authority standpoint in the 4 years that I wasn't there or whatever. So but at that point too, I was doing so good in my career that, like, I didn't want to bend the knee to like, hey, we need you here or else. And I was like, well, I got bookings and I got mocap, and like, here's the open dates. And so they accommodated my open dates, which was very cool. Nothing came of that, and I don't even know if I wanted it to come of it. I'm kind of grateful that it didn't. I know you had posted a story about everyone's 90 days or something like that. A couple,
Yeah.
right?
So I've talked to a bunch of the people that were released, and some of them hit up WWE and they're like, "Can I get out of my 90 days?" And WWE's like, "Yeah, it's budget cuts. How could we say to you it's budget cuts, then still when you offer to not let us pay you for 90 days?" But that wasn't always the case. And some of them got out like a few days early. There were a couple that told me we didn't even know that was a possibility.
Wait, so they got out of they got paid. They paid him up front or no?
No, I think some of them,
Or they didn't even get paid?
yes, they were willing to waive it and not get paid,
Oh,
from what I
wow.
understand, because I think it would have been hard for WWE to justify budget cuts and then
Right.
somebody to say, well, then don't pay me.
Yeah.
And then them be like, no.
Yeah. Wild. Yeah. So when I was there and I got fired, so a lot of people knows when I got fired, I got like my big promo was like fired on a Thursday, PWG on a Friday.
Yes.
And so I remember getting the phone call. I was in a Chipotle with Trent and Tyson Kidd, and I don't remember Ty. I guess it would be Ty Bailey at that point. Who's the guy now? Cameron Seaman.
Canyon Seaman. Yeah.
Okay, so it was Ty Bailey at the point, and Ty Bailey's giving me this big speech, blah blah blah. Creative has nothing for you, which obviously I then went on to make a web series called that. And he was like, and my first question was like, well, can I do indies? He's like, yes, you can do indies, but you have to clear them through me. He's like, I'll let you do anything, you just can't do TV or anything on pay-per-view. I was like, but I can do like regular independent shows. And he's like, yes, but you have to clear them through me. And I was so perplexed by this because I know how that company works. It's like
Yes.
once they're done with you, they just don't want to ever talk to you.
Mhm.
But here's an invitation, him telling me you have to talk to me to do this. And so that night I got on the phone with Super Dragon and we worked out a deal for PWG. So that night I'm texting him and emailing him. I'm bombarding him because I'm not hearing back and I just don't hear from him. And I maybe gave him 6-7 messages being like, I need to know, can I go? You told me I have to clear this through you.
By the way, when am I getting my trash bag full of my boots and everything?
I don't know if they were doing that at that point. And also, I don't know if Goldman had much in the locker room department. But he didn't answer. And then I went and did the show anyways, hoping that I wouldn't get heat. And so then the next weekend, the bookings start piling up and I start texting him or I start emailing him. Hey, can I clear this, this, and this? And he gets back to me, but I could tell he's really annoyed. And I loved that he was annoyed. Right. Yeah. So then I'm emailing him more. Hey, I want this. I want this. I'm texting promoters like, hey, can you say that I want you to be on my show just so I can text this guy? And it gets to the point where I'm emailing him every day, different promoters. They is so upset, but he knows that's the protocol.
Yes.
And so he reaches out to me finally after like 2 weeks and is like, hey, upper management has made a decision. We would like to buy out your 90 days. And he sent me a lump check and he's like, please just leave us alone. Like, you don't need to clear anything. Here's your money. Here's a lump check. You don't need to clear anything else through me. And that's how I ended up so I wanted to do, that's how I ended up. There was a Hammerstein Ballroom clip of me being the secret partner of Bryan Danielson versus Jimmy Rave, and his secret partner was Bison Smith. Rest in peace, one of the greatest. Please Google and YouTube Bison Smith. He was so awesome, especially his match versus Kobashi and Noah. That is in front of like 6,000 people and no one in America knows about, but you should. And you know, it was important that I had kept on putting like, I can't do Ring of Honor. I can't do Ring of Honor because of the 90 days, but my 90 days had been bought out. So I was able to do that show as the surprise. There's a clip on YouTube. I put it on my YouTube. The Hammerstein Ballroom goes just berserk at my entrance. I get up to the second rope. My legs are shaking because I'm so excited. And I can't believe this like welcome I've got from this crowd. And also it's just like, it was very justifying and meant a lot because, you know, WWE just said like, you're a failure, but like the true wrestling fans were like, we love you so much. And that meant so much, but that was all possible because they bought out my 90 days.
So, like when you win the lottery, you can take the sustained payments or the lump sum. Was the lump sum less than what you were going to get, or were they
No,
so?
it was the same.
I was going to say they were so annoyed that they.
Yes. So annoyed by me.
It was strictly for the sake of convenience and cleaning up their inbox.
Yeah, just when he was like, you have to keep in touch with me, when I know they just want to get rid of people and don't ever want to talk to them ever again. I found it like I was so happy with what I knew I was going to go start doing to him.
So you had mentioned like you didn't maybe have the best interactions or maybe relationships with higher ups in WWE. Vince McMahon, obviously the main guy, and then we always hear Kevin Dunn, like the Wizard of Oz. Some people don't even see him. Did you ever interact with Kevin Dunn, and what were your interactions with Vince?
I had one meeting with Vince. It's a pretty notorious story where I told him I like alternative comedy, and he said like Jackie Gleason, and that's when I knew that my career wasn't going to be too high there. But it was a nice conversation with Vince McMahon. I never had a conversation with Kevin Dunn, and I had heard a couple of rumors of why I had been fired. No one was, you'll never really hear the true reason. One of the alleged reasons of a couple of them, there's different theories, but one I had heard through the grapevine was, Kevin Dunn, who didn't know who I was, because I was just a guy who had been in their system for 2 years and then called up or whatever, just looked at me and was just like, who is this guy? He doesn't look like a star, and he was like, let's get rid of him. And so that's like my thought process of Kevin Dunn, which was always something I knew about myself as a wrestler, is I never looked like Batista or John Cena or all of these guys. And I always slowly but surely, like, I was like the Costanza when he left his hat, and you sing the song Costanza. So that's a Seinfeld reference if anyone gets it. So, I'm a slowly but surely guy. Like you slowly but surely learn who I am and become a fan of mine. And so I thought that's what I was going to do with the Scotty Goldman character. And when they gave me the WWE.com show, like I knew that was an opportunity to slowly win over the internet fans, and then eventually, I'll make my name for myself slowly but surely. I just couldn't get cut off at the legs, and I did. And I think allegedly he might have been one of the reasons, or might have not. That could have just been a tall tale. No one will really know. I mean, the people who know, but everyone else does not, and I'm included in that. Everyone else.
So how is your relationship like with Tony Khan? Do you interact with him directly an awful lot? I mean, I can tell you if I have complaints about AEW, sometimes I'll hear from him. So, I mean, I would imagine the roster, like, he's pretty receptive and open and accessible.
Yes, but I'm in a different place in my career. So, if this was 10 years ago, maybe I would have been scared of him like I would of a Vince McMahon. It's very hard for me to tell. Maybe a Griff Garrison isn't as eager to go up to Tony and say hello and chat him up as I would. I'm very confident in myself and my place in wrestling, and I don't walk on eggshells. And I know, if my job's gone tomorrow, I'll be more than fine. This is the job that I wish to have and I hope to have for the rest of my career. But if it's taken away from me, I'm okay. I'll be fine. And so that's the attitude I think a lot of wrestlers have, maybe in WWE, is I don't want to say something stupid to Vince and then he fires me and then I'm screwed. It's all taken away.
Titus grabbed him by the arm one time and he got suspended for it. So like I'll have my boss, who is a millionaire many times over, say, why don't these wrestlers just go talk to Vince? And I'm like, well, a guy touched his arm and got suspended. Right. He's locked away. It's a little bit different. Like, it's just way different. Can you believe that Griff Garrison used 2-in-1 shampoo until a couple months ago?
Well, it does.
With that hair? And
I didn't know that information.
He and Jungle Boy use Kirkland brand shampoo, Costco brand. Nothing wrong with it. I'm just surprised.
It doesn't surprise me, but also I used Pert Plus 2-in-1 for a very long time. And I'll tell you, I only learned that you put shampoo in first and conditioner in second from the movie Billy Madison.
Yeah.
Billy Madison taught me that. And Billy Madison didn't come out till I was like 12 or 13. You know what I'm saying? So like, yeah, because my parents were like, just use this. It's both. I didn't know that there was.
Okay.
So it's fun information, but I get it. I get it with Griff Garrison.
Like even Pillman was sitting next to me. He's like, "What?" He's like, "I've got like $100 worth of product in my hair right now," and he's got a mullet. It's a superstar mullet, but it's a mullet.
I mean, you're talking to a guy who still has hotel shampoos and conditioners in his apartment for the rest of his life. So
that's the funniest thing, like, about traveling again. I went to Jacksonville for Double or Nothing, and I packed so many things that I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot hotels have these there. I don't need to bring body wash and lotion and shampoo. They have them there, so you don't have to.
Hey, it's been a while. It's cool that you got to have that experience. Get your feet wet again. Right?
Yeah, I had to. We had mentioned earlier you doing commentary work. AEW has a lot of great commentators. Is that something you're ever interested in jumping back into? Because you had a real knack for it.
Yeah. You know what? We did that house show. Maybe it was in April. You would probably know more than I would.
Yes.
And Tony had me doing commentary for that. So I'm sure that'll eventually come out when we have some kind of service or something, you know, but it's archived, and it was me. I want to say it was me and Shivani, and we had a very nice rapport, and I really enjoyed doing it. I'll always enjoy doing it. I do think, you know, I look forward to doing that in my future years. So I just don't want to be, I just don't want to take the opportunity of seeing how far the wrestling will take me before I get taken off and put into commentary. But of course, you know, Excalibur is a great friend of mine. I've known him for over 20 years. You know, we knew each other when, you know, we were just young 20-year-olds. So we have a great rapport just in life. And so in a perfect world, in 10 years, you know, if it's up to me, I would love myself and Excalibur to be the 1-2 on AEW. But for now, you know, it's the same reason why I kind of moved on from Ring of Honor. Is I still have some wrestling years left in me, and I want to pursue those. And also, if I had any doubt before, to see Christian Cage is a great example, right? At 47, and is like amazing. It just gives me a lot of hope.
Isn't that amazing? Like, I know, like, I listened to a lot of Conrad shows, and he puts it in perspective. Like, I remember like Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan in the mid-90s, people were like, oh, they're washed up. Now, granted, the rings aren't made like out of cement like they used to be, like what they joke, because the joke was always that once Vince started bumping, the rings changed. So, I mean, that obviously helped, and science has worked. I mean, you got, quite frankly, all 6 guys that were in the TLC 6. I mean, if Bubba Ray wanted to wrestle, he could still wrestle. I think the only thing that keeps Devon from it is he had a stroke recently. But, like, most of those guys are still wrestling at a high level. Like, things are so much different. PCO is 234 years old, and he's still wrestling at a high level.
Yeah. And PCO is another one who I'd watch and just be inspired by, totally inspired by. So you know, even when I was in my early wrestling career, I was always like, I want to wrestle till I'm 65. Mm-hmm. And I think people laughed. And now, you know, as I'm getting closer, like, it's a reality. You know, I don't know at what high level I want to do it, but, you know, I still want to, I love performing. And so I'd still like to do it as long as I possibly can.
Bushwhacker Luke just worked a match. I love it. I love it, man.
You know, one of my favorite matches and the highlights of my whole career is wrestling Johnny Saint while he was 68 years old in Manchester, England, in front of 1,000 people. I never thought I'd be able to do it and get in the ring with him. And then 3 years later, I wrestled him at 71 years old. So
amazing. So we had mentioned the announcing. How much production did you get, like, on that? Was it pretty freewheeling? Did you get any, like, sort of topics they wanted you to hit when you were doing that for the AEW spot? Because, again, as you mentioned, it hasn't surfaced yet. So, like, I wondered, like, how much direction was there?
No, it was kind of, you know, feel free to go out and do your thing. I was, you know, I'm very aware of the product.
Yeah.
You know, when I first had my meeting with Tony Khan, it was the same time they asked me to do AEW Dark commentary in February. I don't know if you remember that.
Okay.
Right. It was like Vicky Guerrero was the guest commentator the week before. And then then the next week I was the guest commentator. And it just so happened, you know, Tony had flown me in and wanted to have a meeting with me just so we could meet and be on the same page about everything. And then they were also like, will you do commentary? I was like, of course. And, you know, I remember, I think Tony was like, you know, that there's the elite and that there's the inner circle. I was like, yeah, of course I know. I'm well aware. And then afterwards he was like, oh, I couldn't believe you knew the product. I was like, yeah, I know the product. Like,
it's a good show.
It's wrestling. Yeah, it's great. It's all my friends. So I think that was the production note, like know the product. And I know it very well.
So as we wrap up, you had mentioned your mocap work. I'm always so fascinated by that and what goes into creating games. And like, I'll mention something. I'll be like, hey, they need to add the Bret Hart accidental spot on British Bulldog from SummerSlam 92. You know, where he launches himself over the ropes and he does like the Randy Orton backbreaker. And I'll get like a random message where Kenny King's like, fine, you come take it while I mocap it then. And you learn like who mocaps these things. Like what was that experience like? Because I mean, you're doing sometimes stuff you're familiar with, or maybe moves that you haven't done in a very long time, I would imagine.
Well, I was mocapping a very long time. So when we were in developmental in OVW 2007, they were using the WWE wrestlers, the developmental wrestlers, and I think because I was friendly with Nova put my name in to be one of the mocappers, which was great because I hated being in OVW, you know, so anything to separate that grind was amazing. And we got paid to do it. So, and then when I got fired, soon after that, they stopped using the wrestlers because they didn't want the wrestlers getting hurt. So they were looking for outside wrestlers. And they remembered that I did a good job at mocap. So then I got put on the team and I was doing, so essentially 2007 to probably 2018 was the last time, maybe even 2019, I did some mocap, a long time. And again, you know, people wondering how we make a living, you know, that was always a great part of the hustle. And there's so many people who've done mocap. Adam Pierce texted me the other day and said, how come you didn't put me over in an interview that tell them that I did mocap? Well, Adam did mocap. Adam Pierce did a lot of mocap.
There are so many modern fans that don't realize he was an amazing wrestler. And it's so weird to me because it was not that long ago.
And we did Andre Hogan for WrestleMania 3.
Oh,
me and and he was Andre, like he was the biggest guy doing mocaps.
You got to take credit for slamming 700-pound Andre in the Silverdome from now on.
And I like half-ass slammed him too.
Yes.
You know? But the best one that I love doing, because I was I wasn't a crazy backyard wrestler, but I loved ECW as a kid, and I loved New Jack, and so like I love stunt wrestling, which I know isn't like, I shouldn't say that. But obviously, you know, I love watching from afar. So that, you know, I might be Joey Janela's only fan, you know, like when he was doing that, I loved it. I think it's crazy. Yeah. It's very unsafe. You shouldn't do it at home, but if you do it, I want to watch it.
I did an in-person interview at the AIW school with Josh Prohibition, and the whole thing was me marking out about him being in the backyard wrestling game. Like,
there you go.
Him and M-Dog, that's what made me go, oh my God, that's so cool. I want to jump off a tree through a table.
Exactly. And so I got to do, I got thrown off the cage. I did Undertaker Mankind, and I was Mankind. They were like, who wants to do this? And I was like, me.
So
you know,
how do they do that? How do they set that up? Are you on a structure, or is it like?
Well, they had a ring, and then they built a scaffold. They built scaffolds big enough to be the size of the Hell in the Cell. And then there was a scaffold up top, and then they just throw some mats down on the ground, and you get hooked. And Ezekiel Jackson was the one.
Oh my God!
Who threw me off? He was Undertaker.
Oh.
I was Mankind, and I was so excited, and everyone couldn't believe how excited I was. But it was so much fun, especially knowing that, you know, like when I was in high school, like I would jump out of trees and like learn how to like roll correctly out of the grass. So to do this from such a high elevation onto pads where I knew I would be safe, it was very exciting.
See, if that were me, regardless of anything else that you've accomplished in your life, my Twitter bio would be slammed Andre at WrestleMania 3, got thrown off Hell in a Cell, Ezekiel Jackson made me famous. Like that's how you do it.
Ezekiel Jackson made me video game famous.
There you go. I mean, just take credit for it all. Was there ever anything in there that they asked you to do and you're like, can I pull this off? Everybody has their physical limitations.
Oh, there were a couple of things. God, nothing that I can remember. I was going to say, when you started asking that question, I remember they asked for me to put the Billy Coates curse in there in the game. And that became like a secret hidden thing because those guys were also wrestling fans, you know? So they were like, let's get your entrance and your finishing moves. And they would secretly put it in for like the creative player stuff.
Because, like, I mean, I know sometimes, like, they'll randomly one year to be like, bam, the Steiner screwdriver is in the game. And I'm like, I wonder how the conversation goes there. It's like, hey, we know that you're never, ever, ever going to see this on WWE TV, but they still want it in the game.
Those it's the programmers who like know they have the ability to just put in a move.
Yes.
And they're super fans, and they know all the moves, and they know all like the cool moves too. So they want to put everything in. And some of the fun was they had a good variety of different wrestlers who could play different roles, but sometimes there was just somebody that it was just impossible to get the person to do one of their moves, and they would have to bring in like somebody special. Some of the times it was the women. Like, no one could do like the Melina splits. I think they had to bring someone who could do the splits, or maybe even Melina at that point. And I want to say some of the rest, maybe even like Evan Bourne, like just no one could do maybe his shooter or the way he does it. So they would have to bring him in. And of course, Hornswoggle, I believe, had to do his own stuff.
Yeah, it's like when I look at a Montez Ford Frog Splash, it's like, man, who are they going to get to emulate that specifically?
And there was one time where none of us could figure out how to do the Roman Reigns super punch.
Really?
Like all of our footing was it was 2 left feet for everyone. And everyone's all like, oh, this is easy. And then we couldn't do it. And then Sanjay was next, and then he couldn't do it. And then Pierce couldn't do it. And then Trent couldn't do it. And just no one could figure out how to do it.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm so fascinated about that. I'm sure the next time we talk, I'll just ask you more stories about that. But Wrestling Anonymous, the new podcast that's out. You all can head over to twitch.tv/Colt Cabana as well. You're all over the place. AEW programming.
AEW Dark, AEW Elevation, and pretty soon Rampage is coming. So that's super exciting. And we're coming to a town near you. I think Miami and Houston and Charlotte and Dallas. And, all these towns have been announced. So come out and see live wrestling. And then once a week, every Tuesday, all I ask is download and subscribe Wrestling Anonymous. It's absolutely free. And if you have a weird story that you've always wanted to tell, feel free to call in. Or if you have, I always say, like, if your mom has a story, or someone who doesn't follow the wrestling scene, but they've always have a weird story. I always welcome those kind of stories too. I think that would always be fun to play.
I look forward to somebody calling in and being like, yeah, this video game company called me. None of the wrestlers knew how to do a Superman punch. They picked me up off the street. I nailed it in one take.
And it was Nate Diaz.
It was Nate Diaz. Colt Cabana, thank you so much.
I appreciate you being on. Thanks a lot.
Until next time, guys, we're out.